76 and before it. But I just want to show you that orientation from where we were yesterday. See now, before, and you'll see me do it at other sites, I had to walk down with the picture and show every single person, and the idea is getting tired of doing that. Now we can sit spread out. But you see that's Megiddo, where we were yesterday. And this is aerial looking north across the Valley of Armageddon to where the position of Nazareth is. Okay? Everyone see that? If you look at the map on the next page, that red arrow gives you that perspective of the angle that the aerial photograph is taken. Below that is an old picture from the early 1900s of Nazareth and what it looked like at that point. Okay. Now we come to the churches that were here, and you're looking at this little picture of this church that was built in 1730 that stood right here. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about where we started the morning yesterday at Joppa, right? And we were looking at that church that was built in the late 1800s. That's sitting on that site. Okay, so what hasn't been able to be done there has been done here, but all the early excavations had to deal with that church sitting there. Where they really wanted to dig was, of course, one thing on top of another, directly under that 1730 church. But they couldn't do it. So the early excavations had to, dig in different places around where they really wanted to dig. Then they made the decision in 1950s, the Catholics made the decision to destroy that 1730 church in order to build the biggest church in the Middle East. And so they knocked that down. They built this church in 1960, so they knocked it down in 1954. So from 1954 to 1960, archaeologists could get in there and dig where they really wanted to dig, which was right underneath. And the name of the archaeologist that dug there, his name is Bagatti. Okay? And so when we're thinking about the layers, right now we're starting at the top. This goes through it from the top to the bottom. So that's the layer currently. And then underneath that, 1730 church that was destroyed. You can't see anything from the 1730 church, I don't think. I don't know of anywhere you can see it. And then underneath that, on the page 78, is the Crusader Church. And so there's enough of the Crusader Church preserved to provide an outline of the plan. When you have these churches, what you have is their foundations, and usually not the entire foundation, but a portion of the foundation, but enough of it that you can reconstruct it. Okay, so now look to the front of the church. You see the three half circles, and we're going to be using this word a lot as we go through this country. These are apses. Okay, and a lot of churches, the earlier churches, tend to have one apse, and the later churches, like the Crusader churches, often have three of these apses. Okay, so this church, this green-oriented church, we'll be seeing the apses are preserved in there. We'll be able to see them, and they're facing east. Okay, and this is the typical way that holy places in general face, is towards the rising sun. Okay, so we have that. Then below that, now they're excavating down below the Crusader Church, and now things start really getting interesting. What's below the Crusader Church? Byzantine, an early Byzantine church. Now we're talking serious stuff, because now we have a commemorative church that dates back to the 4th century. Okay? Now, here's an important thing to think about. Why don't we have commemorative churches that are earlier than the 4th century AD?
It was outlawed.
It was outlawed. That's the time of persecution. So we went over that in Caesarea yesterday, right? What do you think they would have done when they were torturing Christians for being Christians if they would have tried to build a commemorative church over a site? Wouldn't have worked. And so it didn't happen. And so just because you don't have a commemorative church until the time of Constantine and beyond, that does not mean that the places weren't known and commemorated by people visiting them and whatnot before that. I want you to think as an American, okay? If you go to the Twin Towers disaster that we all witnessed, on television at least, if you go to that place now, how much archaeological evidence are you going to find from those Twin Towers? No, you're going to find inscription, right? Let me ask you, do you think that Americans, and do you think specifically that New Yorkers are going to forget that event in 50 years? How about 100 years? How about 200 or 300 years? Think they're going to forget? Here's the key. As long as there are New Yorkers in New York, as long as there are Americans in America, they're not going to forget. Okay? How much more so the things of Christ? Yeah. Now here's the thing. Followers of Jesus lived in this land from the time of Jesus until today. We have one right here, right?
Thanks God, we still exist in this town.
But that's a key understanding. Christians have lived continuously in this land from the time of Jesus until today. They don't forget and they pass on the knowledge to. So when we say a Byzantine church, I'm not talking about the Byzantines from some other place with knowledge that this is where this happened, came here and built a Byzantine church. It was the locals who knew where these events happened. And then when the Byzantine period came, they were for the first time able to build a church that commemorated that local site and that local knowledge. You understand? It's not iffy at all. It's consistent throughout the country. It is solid as a rock, the memory of these places. Now it might not, it's not going to convince you looking at that building, right? That, oh yeah, obviously that's where the event happened in the Bible. What is convincing, evidence-wise, is what's underneath that building. And then underneath the building before it, and then underneath the building before it, and underneath and all the way down. Okay, so let's look at that Byzantine church that's in red. And you see that it has only one apse. You see that? Mm-hmm. That apse is also preserved in archaeology, and we'll see it in there. Okay? And of course, I'm gonna show you where the Crusader apses are, and this apse is gonna be lower underneath the level of where the Crusader apses are. Okay? Then, amazingly, there's something underneath the Byzantine church.
Yeah.
And so you keep digging down and you come across what Bugatti called a synagogue church.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to emphasize, and one built by Judeo-Christians, because he wanted to emphasize that they were both Jewish and they were Christian in their theology.
Peter, James, and John.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we know that they're now? Now you see the outline of it in black, okay? And I want to emphasize, there's not enough of this building left to know exactly its plan. Actually, there's only bits and pieces of this building that are left. However, just as you find a pottery sherd, and that talks about the whole pot, that's what you find of this building. You find pieces of it, and I don't mean a little piece here and there, I mean lots of pieces of it. So pieces, we have the floor of it that we're going to be looking at, or a portion of the floor of it. We have pieces of the columns and the capitals and the cornices and on and on and on. And then we have synagogues from this early period in other places in the Galilee that have been excavated. So just like you can take a pot from this site and a pot from this site and parallel the two and say, oh, these are the same pot and they come from the same period, you can do that with pieces of a building, because they made their columns in a certain style and their capitals in a certain style. So you can say, oh look, we have this synagogue over here that dates to this time, and look, we have the same pieces of the building over here. We have a synagogue that probably looked like that, and we can reconstruct what it probably looked like. Now, at the front of a synagogue, you often have what's called a Torah ark, right, where the scrolls were kept. It's similar to an apse. If you look over at the apse tends to be bigger in churches, and the Torah ark tends to be smaller in the synagogues. So in this synagogue level, where the floor is preserved, there were plaster on the sides from that level, and in that plaster, inscriptions. Okay, and so they're very fragmentary in the way that they're preserved, but one of them says the name Jesus. Another one says, "Rejoice, Mary." Okay, so those match not what you would expect in a Jewish, traditional Jewish synagogue, but in a Judeo Jewish synagogue. Okay, and now we get down to the floor, and we start looking, and this is the next page, and again, you're going to see this inside, but you see these symbols, and immediately when you look at these symbols, do you think Jewish symbology, or do you think Christian? Christian. And so this one that's highlighted here is called the Mosaic of the Crown, and it, of course, is emphasizing Jesus as King of the universe, right? And so we have here the Chi Rho. You see that? This is also sometimes called a Tau Rho, meaning the same Chi and Tau in the Greek and the Hebrew letter that is the Chi and the Rho are the first two letters of Christ. So this is a symbol, a monogram of Jesus. Now, we're used to thinking about this with the time of Constantine, aren't we? The Chi Rho. Everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
This is the 2nd century AD. Constantine is a 4th century AD. I don't know if you've heard it. Have you ever heard that the cross was not really a symbol of early Christianity? It didn't come along until much later. Have you heard that? Anyone? Anyone? Baloney. Baloney. We have a cross here. We have crosses all over the place here. We also have crosses on ossuaries. And I'm not talking little scratch marks. I'm talking defined crosses that were used, that went out of use in 70 AD. Okay, so you hear a lot of things about early Christianity that just simply aren't true, or against the evidence. Now, you have to start going through the orientation. If you go over to the next page, I want to go up to this chart that shows now these basic outlines of these buildings and the evidence on top of each other in green, red, and gray. Do you see that? Now, notice that the Christian churches, the Crusader and the Byzantine churches that face east, are oriented differently than the synagogue underneath. The synagogue underneath is not facing east. Guess what direction it's facing?
Jerusalem.
South and towards Jerusalem, which is typical in synagogues. Now, how do we know that? Because we don't have that building foundations in it, and it's preserved very well. So how do we know that? Well, look over to the right there, and you see the mosaics. You know what I'm talking about with the mosaic, the little cubes, the tesserae that are arranged. Those ones that you see down at the bottom there are from the Byzantine Church. And you can tell when you look at a mosaic floor which way it's oriented because of the symbolism that's on it and the design that's on it. And it's oriented like the building itself, east, west. You see that? The floor underneath, where this mosaic of the crown is located, is oriented north-south. And so you have these, and you'll see that you have these going in two different orientations. I can't do that. I'm not a drummer. Okay, but do you understand? So the evidence shows us that the building underneath is oriented towards the south, which dates to the 2nd century AD. It's a synagogue. Now this is what you're going to see, this picture underneath. And so I got my lines drawing all over the place to show you what you're gonna see there. But if you flip over just for a second over to the next page, we got to talk about what's under the synagogue floor. And what was there was a house. And there's hardly anything left from this house. But I've done excavations myself at a site called Makatir north of Jerusalem, and we were digging Jewish houses. Now, how do you know that you're digging a Jewish house? Well, in the bottom of those houses, you have these mikvah, which is a ritual bath underneath that usually have stairs that you can see this one has going down. And these are in the basement of Jewish houses. And they distinguish them archaeologically from houses from some other period that aren't distinctly Jewish. Okay? This is from that house, this mikvah. Later, it's reused in the synagogue church as a baptismal. But originally it's part of that house. You're also going to see a cave in there, which is also part of that house. Almost all these ancient houses have caves associated with them where they keep some animals, and you're basically looking at the basement of a house without the walls preserved. Okay, and this makes sense, doesn't it? That your preservation, how much a building is preserved, is going to diminish as you go down through the layers. That's perfectly preserved. The Crusader Church isn't, but you can see a lot of it. The Byzantine Church, you can see a portion of it. And then the Synagogue Church, you can see the floor of it and a few other things. And then under that, you can see the mikvah, and you can see the cave associated with it. But how do we know, just from the mikvah, do we know for certain there was a house there? Well, yes, in some ways, because if you look at the pottery underneath, you also have to deal with all the material that comes with the excavation. So when they were excavating where this mikvah is, look at all the pottery down there in this picture that's all preserved and on display. It comes from the time of Jesus. The coins found date to the time of Jesus. So this mikvah is in use at the time of Jesus, and before that, and after that, and in use before the time of the synagogue church being in use. Does that make sense? It's in pieces, but it's evidence. Okay, but outside of the evidence, we wouldn't know anything about that house. It would just be another mikvah. It would just be another house that it probably belonged to. We know it was in use in the 1st century AD, but outside that, we wouldn't know much of anything beyond that, right? But then when we bring scripture in and we read, and it's right there above the layers, says God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. You are to call him Yahweh, which is Yahweh saves. Jesus in Greek, Jesus, translated into English from Greek. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God." How do we know where that event took place? Did it take place over there? Maybe over there? Maybe in a house that hasn't been excavated over there? Or did it happen in this stack of archaeology that marks exactly where it happened? That comes all the way up from the 1st century. Look, we can go look at the layers. If you go all the way down to layer 1, do we have anything from the time of Jesus? We've got the pottery, we've got the coins, we've got the mikvah that was in use at that time according to the material found with it. And then look at all those layers stacked on top of another, as this event that we just read was commemorated over centuries and over the last 2,000 years. That all together stands as a memorial of evidence, a monument of evidence that says, where did that happen? It happened right here. You understand? So we're not just walking by, oh yes, this happened here, and this happened there, and this happened here, isn't it wonderful? Yes, we have the evidence that it happened here, that this is the house where Mary lived in with Joseph. Okay? So now what we're going to do is go back to the page before, and we're going to be, maybe try to be a little sneaky, but we got to make sure we don't get Michelle in trouble. But if we do, definitely we're going to sell him down the river.
Sorry.
So we got to be super quiet when we go in there.
Exactly.
Men with your hats off. Women, you don't have to cover your heads.
The father inside is very nice, but he's discreet.
Yes. Well, it's because we don't know that because it hasn't all been excavated, only a small portion.
So we don't really know how big.
We don't know. We know generally how big the village is by the tombs that were found around. You know, that kind of outline where it is. But it's definitely bigger than that.
Bigger than that.
Yeah. Okay, so look at this. When you go in there, we're going to be over on the left side of this picture. Okay, now this is important because it's going to be a little confusing when you're in there. So we're going to be over on the left side of this picture, and we're going to line up against the railing there. If some other group is there, then we'll just wait for them to clear, and then we'll walk up there. So you're going to be standing over where the mikvah is and looking down on the mikvah, and then above it, that patch that you see right here, that patch is where the floor of the synagogue is preserved. Okay? You can see it also in the picture above there. And then this wall that's to our left of the mikvah, which will be to our right when we're in there looking at it, is the Byzantine.
Hold your book up where they can see where you're.
Is the Byzantine church wall. Okay, and then that's going to go up to the other side of the picture here, and this is the apse that's coming around from the Byzantine church, the red building. Okay, and then we're going to look. It's out of the picture, but over where I'm pointing here at the Crusader apses, we'll be able to see them. And you'll see the mosaic of the crown with the chi row, and then the crown that's around that. What did we just read? We just read that he's going to this descendant is of David, and that he's going to inherit David's throne and rule over his kingdom forever and ever, right? And so that's what that symbol, Jesus, the King, is the eternal King. That's what that is representing. Now I'm going to try to be a little sneaky. In fact, I'll ask Michelle if he thinks I can get